Kethvar stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, his tall, silver body perfectly still. The other council members floated in their energy pods around the circular room. Each one represented a different species from across the galaxy. Some looked like floating jellyfish, others like walking trees, and a few resembled nothing that could be found on any single world. The council had called him here for a special task. Kethvar was a Zephyrian, and his people were known throughout the galaxy for one thing above all others: they could watch and record without getting involved. For thousands of years, Zephyrians had served as observers for the council. They would go to different worlds, watch what happened, and write reports that helped the council make important decisions. Observer Kethvar spoke, the council leader, whose voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. We have a new assignment for you. A holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed a small section of the galaxy that Kethvar had never visited before. In that section, there was a young species called humans. They lived on a blue and green world called Earth, and they had only recently learned how to travel between stars. The humans are at war, the council leader continued. They are fighting against the Vorthan Empire. This is their first major conflict since they left their home world. Kethvar nodded slowly. He had heard of the Vorthans. They were a powerful military species that had conquered dozens of worlds. They were known for their advanced weapons and their refusal to accept surrender from their enemies. Any species that fought against them usually died quickly. The war has been going on for 6 months, said another council member, this one shaped like a floating crystal. The humans have survived much longer than we expected. We need to understand why. The holographic display changed to show pictures of human ships and soldiers. They looked small and weak compared to the Vorthan forces. Their technology seemed simple, almost primitive. Kethvar had seen many species like this before. They usually lasted only a few weeks against an enemy, like the Vorthans. Your job is to observe how the humans fight, the council leader explained. We need to know if they are dangerous to the rest of the galaxy, or if they need our protection. Watch their military tactics, study their technology, and report back to us about what kind of species they really are. Kethvar had done this job 17 times before. Each time, the pattern was the same. He would arrive at a war zone, watch the battles, and write a report about what he saw. Most species fought in predictable ways. They used their best weapons, followed standard military strategies, and either won or lost based on who had better technology or more soldiers. I understand, Kethvar said in his calm, emotionless voice. When do I leave? Immediately, the council leader replied. Your ship, the Silent Eye, is ready for departure. You will have full cloaking technology, so neither side will be able to detect you. Observe everything, but do not interfere under any circumstances. Kethvar bowed slightly and left the chamber. He walked through the long corridors of the council station, his mind already focused on the task ahead. He had studied the basic information about humans during the meeting. They were a carbon-based species that had evolved from hunters on their home world. They had only developed space travel about 200 years ago, which made them incredibly young compared to most galactic civilizations. The Silent Eye was waiting for him in the docking bay. It was a sleek, dark ship designed for one purpose: to watch without being seen. The ship's cloaking technology was so advanced that it could hide from even the most sensitive sensors. Kethvar had used ships like this many times before. He settled into the pilot seat and began the journey to human space. The trip would take several days, even with the ship's advanced engines. During the journey, he reviewed everything the council knew about humans and Vorthans. The Vorthans were an old enemy of peace in the galaxy. They believed that only the strongest species deserved to survive, and they proved their strength by conquering others. They had destroyed entire civilizations without showing any mercy. Their military was disciplined, brutal, and effective. The humans were different. They had no major military tradition. Before leaving their homeworld, they had fought many wars against each other, but these were small conflicts compared to galactic standards. They had never faced an enemy like the Vorthans before. What puzzled Kethvar was how the humans had survived for 6 months. According to the Council's information, the Vorthan Empire had sent a massive fleet to human space. This fleet had conquered 3 major human colonies and was now pushing toward Earth itself. By all logical predictions, the war should have been over in a matter of weeks. As his ship traveled through hyperspace, Cathvar prepared his observation equipment. He had cameras that could record from impossible distances, sensors that could detect the smallest details of a battle, and computers that could analyze everything he saw. His job was to be completely objective, to watch and record without letting his personal feelings affect his observations. The journey gave him time to think about his previous assignments. He had watched the Krillian Defense Force make their last stand against the Mordak invasion. He had observed the Stellar Commonwealth's 3-year war against the Hive Collective. In every case, the outcome had been predictable based on technology, numbers, and military strategy. Sometimes the smaller, weaker side won through superior tactics or unexpected alliances. Sometimes they fought bravely but were eventually overwhelmed. Occasionally, they surprised everyone by developing new technology during the war. But in the end, every species fought in ways that made sense to Cathvar's analytical mind. When the Silent Eye finally arrived in human space, Cathvar felt confident that this assignment would be like all the others. He would observe the humans for a few weeks, document their fighting methods, and write a report explaining why they had lasted longer than expected. The Council would read his report, make their decision about humanity's future, and send him to observe another war somewhere else in the galaxy. He had no way of knowing that everything he believed about war, about species survival, and about the nature of civilization itself was about to change forever. The Silent Eye dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Cathvar immediately activated all his sensors and began scanning the area. What he found made him check his equipment twice to make sure it was working correctly. A human defense fleet was positioned around the 4th planet in the system. Cathvar counted 37 ships in total. Most of them were small frigates and destroyers, with a few larger cruisers mixed in. At the center of the formation was a single battleship that looked like it had been patched together from spare parts. Facing them was a Vorthan assault fleet of over 200 ships. The Vorthan vessels were sleek, dark, and built for war. Each one was larger and more heavily armed than the human ships. The odds were so overwhelming that Cathvar wondered why the humans hadn't retreated already. He positioned the Silent Eye at a safe distance and began recording everything. Through his sensors, he could listen to the communications between the human ships. The fleet was commanded by Captain Jake Morrison, whose voice came across the radio channels with calm authority. "All ships, this is Morrison," the captain said. "The Vorthans are demanding our surrender. They want us to stand down and let them take the colony." Cathvar expected to hear fear or desperation in the human voices. Instead, he heard something that confused him. The humans sounded almost amused. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Amy Chun on the tactical channel," came a woman's voice. "I've been running the numbers on their formation. They're flying in a standard attack pattern. Very predictable." "Copy that, Amy," Morrison replied. "All ships, prepare for pattern Delta. Remember, we don't need to destroy them all. We just need to make them think twice about coming back." Cathvar had never heard of pattern Delta, but he was about to witness something that would make him question everything he knew about military strategy. When the Vorthans began their attack, they moved in perfect formation. Their ships advanced in 3 waves, with their heavy cruisers in front and their support vessels behind. It was a textbook assault that should have overwhelmed the human defenses in minutes. Instead, the human fleet scattered like leaves in the wind. The smaller human ships broke away from the main formation and began flying in patterns that seemed completely random. Some headed straight toward the Vorthan fleet. Others curved away at impossible angles. A few actually flew backwards while firing their weapons. Cathvar watched in confusion as a human cargo ship, barely armed with mining lasers, charged directly at a Vorthan heavy cruiser. The cargo ship was destroyed within seconds, but its explosion damaged the cruiser's shields. Immediately, 3 human frigates appeared from different directions and began attacking the same cruiser with concentrated fire. "What are they doing?" Cathvar whispered to himself. The battle continued, and the human tactics became even more bizarre. When their ships took damage, instead of retreating for repairs, they used their damaged vessels as weapons. A human destroyer with a broken engine allowed itself to be pushed by two smaller ships, turning into a guided missile that crashed into a Vorthan carrier. Lieutenant Chen's voice came across the communications again. Morrison, I've got an idea. See that cluster of Vorthan ships near the asteroid field? I see them, Amy. What are you thinking? If we can get them to chase us into the asteroids, we can use the rocks as cover. But we'll need to make them really angry first. How do we do that? Chen's response made Kethvar's instruments spike with confusion. We rammed their command ship. The humans actually did it. Captain Morrison's own battleship, the largest vessel in their fleet, charged directly at the Vorthan command vessel. The human ship's shields failed under the concentrated enemy fire, and its hull began to crack from the damage. But Morrison kept flying straight at the enemy. At the last second, just before impact, the human battleship fired every weapon it had directly into the Vorthan command ship's bridge. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but it also threw the entire Vorthan fleet into confusion. Without their command ship, the Vorthan vessels began flying in circles, unsure of what to do next. The remaining human ships, now led by Amy Chen from her small cruiser, began picking off the confused enemies one by one. The battle lasted for 6 hours. When it was over, the Vorthan fleet retreated, leaving behind 43 destroyed ships. The humans had lost 29 ships, including Captain Morrison's battleship. By any normal calculation, the Vorthans should have won easily. Instead, they were running away. Kethvar spent the next several hours reviewing his recordings, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The human tactics made no logical sense. They had wasted ships on suicide attacks, used damaged vessels as weapons, and sacrificed their command ship for psychological advantage. Yet somehow, it had worked. He listened to the communications from the surviving human ships as they regrouped around the colony. The humans weren't celebrating their victory. Instead, they were mourning their losses and planning for the next attack. Amy, this is Commander Walsh from the Colony Defense Station, came a voice from the planet's surface. That was incredible flying out there. We lost too many good people, Chen replied, her voice heavy with sadness. Morrison shouldn't have had to ram that command ship. We should have found another way. But you saved the colony, Walsh insisted. 200,000 people are alive because of what you did. And 37 ships full of people are dead because we couldn't think of a better plan, Chen said. We need to do better next time. Kethvar made his first notes about the battle. He wrote about the unusual human tactics, their willingness to sacrifice their own ships, and their strange emotional responses to victory. But he couldn't explain why their methods had been so effective. Over the next few days, he watched the humans repair their remaining ships and prepare new defenses. They worked with an energy and creativity that impressed him. Civilian cargo ships were converted into warships. Mining equipment was turned into weapons. Even passenger liners were fitted with armor and guns. What struck him most was how the humans talked about the war. They didn't speak of glory or conquest. They talked about protecting their families, saving their colonies, and stopping the Vorthans from hurting innocent people. We're not warriors, he heard one human mechanic say to another while they worked on a damaged frigate. We're just regular folks trying to keep our homes safe. Then why are we so good at this? The other mechanic asked. Maybe because we care more about what we're protecting than what we're destroying. Kethvar recorded that conversation, though he wasn't sure why it seemed important. He was beginning to realize that understanding human warfare might require more than just watching their battles. He might need to understand the humans themselves. Kethvar followed the human fleet to New Berlin, a farming colony on the edge of human space. The planet had been under attack for 3 weeks, and the Vorthan ground forces had surrounded the main settlement. What the observer found there challenged everything he thought he knew about how civilized species conducted warfare. The colony's defenders were led by Danny Rodriguez, a former Marine who had been living as a farmer when the war began. Rodriguez had no formal military command, no advanced weapons, and no training in large-scale combat operations. What he did have was 8,000 colonists who refused to surrender. Kethvar positioned his cloaked ship in orbit and began monitoring the situation on the ground. His sensors showed Vorthan forces surrounding the human settlement on all sides. The aliens had superior weapons, better armor, and more soldiers. They should have overrun the colony within days. Instead, they had been stuck in the same positions for weeks. The first thing that confused Kethvar was the age of the human defenders. Through his long-range cameras, he could see children as young as 12 years old operating communication equipment and supply lines. Elderly civilians, some over 70 years old, were building weapons from farming tools and construction materials. In every other species Kethvar had observed, warfare was conducted by trained soldiers while civilians either evacuated or hid in shelters. The humans had turned their entire population into a military force. He watched a 12-year-old girl named Katie run messages between different defense positions while Vorthan plasma bolts flew over her head. She moved through the settlement like she was playing a game, ducking behind buildings and crawling through drainage tunnels to avoid enemy fire. "Katie, this is Rodriguez," came the man's voice over the radio. "What's the status on the northern perimeter?" "The farming equipment is working great," Katie replied cheerfully. Mr. Henderson turned 3 tractors into mobile gun platforms. "The Vorthans can't figure out why our vehicles keep moving around so much." An elderly man named Henderson had indeed converted farming tractors into combat vehicles. He welded metal plates onto them for armor and mounted weapons taken from destroyed Vorthan equipment. The improvised tanks moved through the fields around the settlement, appearing in unexpected places to attack enemy positions before disappearing again. What disturbed Kethvar most was how normal the humans acted about their impossible situation. He watched families eat dinner together while artillery shells exploded in the distance. He saw children doing homework assignments while their parents built bombs in the next room. Lisa Hayes, a school teacher, had organized the civilian supply operations with the same efficiency she once used to manage her classroom. She treated dangerous missions through enemy territory like field trips, carefully explaining to her volunteers what they needed to accomplish and how to stay safe. "Remember," Hayes told a group of teenagers preparing to sneak supplies to an isolated defense position, "the Vorthans have motion sensors, but they're calibrated for adult-sized targets. If you stay low and move slowly, you should be invisible to their equipment." "What if we get caught?" asked one of the teenagers. "Then you follow Protocol 7, Hayes replied calmly. "Drop the supplies, surrender peacefully, and wait for rescue. We don't abandon our people ever." This was another thing that confused Kethvar. The humans had established protocols for surrendering and being captured. But they also had protocols for rescuing captured humans and even for treating captured Vorthans. He watched Rodriguez himself lead a night raid on a Vorthan prison camp. The mission's goal wasn't just to rescue captured humans, it was also to provide medical care to wounded Vorthan soldiers who had been left behind by their own forces. "Why are we helping them?" asked one of Rodriguez's men as they bandaged a Vorthan with a broken leg. "Because that's what separates us from them," Rodriguez replied. "They leave their wounded to die. We save everyone we can." The rescued Vorthan soldier stared at the humans with confusion and fear. Through his translation device, Kethvar heard the alien whisper, "Why do you help your enemies?" "You're not our enemy," Rodriguez said gently. "Your leaders are our enemies. You're just a soldier following orders, same as my people." Over the following days, Kethvar observed the effects of this human approach to warfare. The Vorthan soldiers began to hesitate before attacking civilian areas. Some of them started leaving medical supplies where humans could find them. A few even defected to the human side, providing information about Vorthan plans and weaknesses. The human defense of New Berlin wasn't just militarily effective, it was converting their enemies. But the most remarkable thing Kethvar witnessed was how the humans maintained their society during the siege. Schools continued to operate, with lessons being taught in bomb shelters. The hospital kept running, treating humans and Vorthans alike. The settlement's councils still held democratic meetings to make important decisions. During one council meeting, the colonists debated whether to use their limited ammunition to attack a Vorthan supply convoy or to defend against an expected assault on the settlement's water treatment plant. "If we hit the convoy, we might delay their next major attack," argued Henderson, the elderly farmer who had converted his tractors. "But if we lose the water plant, we'll have to surrender within a week," countered Hayes, the school teacher. The colonists voted to defend the water plant. But then Katie, The 12-year-old messenger raised her hand. "What if we do both?" she asked. "The convoy has to pass through Miller's Canyon. We could cause a rock slide to block the road without using any ammunition." The adult stared at the child for a moment. Then Rodriguez smiled. "Katie, you might just be a tactical genius." The plan worked perfectly. A carefully placed explosive charge brought down part of the canyon wall, trapping the Vorthan supply convoy, without costing the humans any weapons or soldiers. Meanwhile, their saved ammunition allowed them to successfully defend the water treatment plant. Kethvar watched all of this with growing amazement. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were innovating their way through it. Every problem became a puzzle to solve. Every setback became a challenge to overcome. Even when the Vorthan commanders finally decided to level the entire settlement with orbital bombardment, the humans found a way to turn the situation to their advantage. They used the advance warning to evacuate all non-essential personnel through a network of tunnels they had been secretly digging for weeks. When the bombardment began, only the essential defenders remained in the settlement. But they weren't just waiting to die. They were using the chaos to launch their own attack on the Vorthan ground forces. As Vorthan ships rained fire on the settlement, Rodriguez led his people in a direct assault on the enemy positions. The Vorthans, focused on the bombardment from above, never expected an attack from the very people they were trying to eliminate. The battle was over within hours. The Vorthan ground forces, demoralized by weeks of unexpected human tactics and confused by the surprise attack, retreated to their ships and left the system. New Berlin was saved, but Kethvar was more confused than ever. The humans had won through methods that made no logical sense, using children as soldiers, treating enemies as potential friends, and turning their entire civilization into a weapon while somehow remaining civilized. He began to wonder if he was witnessing something that had never happened before in galactic history. Despite the victory at New Berlin, the war was far from over. Kethvar followed the human forces to the industrial world of Haven Prime, where the situation was much worse. The Vorthans had conquered the planet 2 months earlier, and most observers would have considered the world lost. The humans disagreed. Kethvar's sensors detected no human military presence on the surface of Haven Prime. The Vorthan occupation forces controlled all major cities, spaceports, and industrial facilities. Their patrols moved freely through the streets, and their propaganda broadcasts played constantly on all communication channels. But deep beneath the surface, something incredible was happening. The humans had built an entire civilization in the tunnels and caves under Haven Prime. Kethvar's deep penetrating scanners revealed a network of passages that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the planet's surface. In these tunnels lived over 500,000 human refugees, along with thousands of resistance fighters. The underground city was led by Marcus Webb, a former software engineer who had transformed himself into something the galaxy had never seen before, a ghost who lived in the spaces between spaces. Webb moved through the tunnel system like it was his own private world, appearing and disappearing through maintenance shafts, abandoned mining tunnels, and sewer systems. Kethvar watched Webb coordinate resistance operations from a command center built inside an old subway station. The human had surrounded himself with dozens of computer screens showing feeds from hidden cameras throughout the occupied cities above. He could watch Vorthan patrols, monitor their communications, and predict their movements with uncanny accuracy. "Marcus, we've got a problem," reported a young woman who had just returned from a scouting mission to the surface. "The Vorthans are planning to execute 50 human prisoners tomorrow morning. Public execution in Central Square." Webb studied the information on his screens. "Show me their transport routes, guard rotations, and escape paths. We're going to get our people back." What followed was the most complex rescue operation Kethvar had ever observed. The human resistance didn't just plan to free the prisoners, they planned to do it without killing a single Vorthan soldier. "Why?" asked one of Webb's lieutenants. "These are the same aliens who are trying to wipe us out. Because every Vorthan we kill makes it harder to win the peace after this war is over," Webb explained. "We're not fighting to destroy them. We're fighting to show them there's a better way." The rescue operation began at dawn. Human resistance fighters emerged from storm drains, maintenance tunnels, and subway entrances throughout the occupied city. They moved in perfect coordination, using Webb's network of hidden cameras to avoid Vorthan patrols. The actual rescue was carried out by Dr. Helen Foster, a physician who had become one of the Resistance's most effective field operatives. Foster walked openly through the streets, wearing a fake Vorthan uniform and carrying forged medical orders. "I need to examine the prisoners for infectious diseases," she told the Vorthan guards in their own language. "There's been an outbreak in Sector 7, and we can't risk it spreading to our forces." The Vorthans, who were terrified of human diseases they didn't understand, allowed Foster into the prison compound. Within an hour, all 50 human prisoners had been evacuated for medical treatment and were safely hidden in the tunnel system. But Foster didn't stop there. She also treated 17 wounded Vorthan soldiers who had been injured in recent skirmishes with the Resistance. She left behind medical supplies and instructions for caring for the wounded, all written in the Vorthan language. "Why did you help our injured?" one of the Vorthan guards asked her before she left. "Because they're injured," Foster replied simply. "That's all the reason I need." This pattern repeated itself throughout Haven Prime's underground war. The human resistance fought with incredible effectiveness, but they also went out of their way to minimize casualties on both sides. They sabotaged Vorthan equipment instead of destroying it completely. They captured enemy soldiers instead of killing them. They rescued Vorthan civilians from dangerous situations even when it put their own operations at risk. Kethvar watched the Resistance help evacuate a Vorthan school when a human sabotage operation accidentally started a fire in a nearby building. The humans could have used the chaos to attack Vorthan forces, but instead they focused entirely on making sure no children were hurt. "This makes no tactical sense," Kethvar muttered to himself as he recorded the incident. "They're wasting resources on enemy civilians." But as the weeks passed, he began to see the results of this waste. Vorthan civilians started leaving food and medical supplies where the Resistance could find them. Vorthan soldiers began warning humans about upcoming raids. Some Vorthan officers even started secretly sharing intelligence with the Resistance. The humans were converting their occupiers through kindness. Marcus Webb explained the strategy during a planning meeting with his top lieutenants. "Every Vorthan we help becomes a potential ally. Every act of mercy we show proves we're not the monsters their propaganda says we are. We're not just fighting to win this war, we're fighting to win the peace that comes after." The Resistance's most ambitious operation came when they learned that the Vorthan commander was planning to destroy Haven Prime's fusion reactor, which would kill millions of humans and Vorthans alike. Instead of a military assault on the reactor facility, Webb planned something unprecedented, a joint operation with Vorthan defectors. Kethvar watched in amazement as humans and Vorthans worked together to prevent the reactor's destruction. The mixed team moved through the facility's security systems using both human ingenuity and Vorthan technical knowledge. When they encountered guards, the Vorthans on the team convinced their former comrades to stand down while the humans disabled the reactor's self-destruct mechanism. The operation succeeded, but it also revealed something that made Kethvar question everything he knew about interspecies conflict. The Vorthan soldiers who had helped the Resistance weren't motivated by coercion or bribery. They had genuinely changed sides because they believed the humans were right. "Your people showed us a different way to live," one of the Vorthan defectors told Webb after the mission was complete. "We never knew war could be fought without hatred." The underground resistance of Haven Prime lasted for 4 months before the planet was officially liberated by human military forces. But by the time the military arrived, most of the work had already been done. The Vorthan occupation had collapsed from within, undermined by a resistance movement that fought with compassion instead of vengeance. Dr. Foster had established underground hospitals that treated humans and Vorthans equally. Marcus Webb had created a communication network that connected resistance fighters, Vorthan defectors, and civilian populations across multiple worlds. The tunnels beneath Haven Prime had become not just a hiding place, but a laboratory for testing new ways to conduct warfare. When the human military commanders arrived to liberate the planet, they found something unexpected, a population of humans and Vorthans working together to rebuild their world. "How did you accomplish this?" asked Admiral Chen, the same Amy Chen who had fought at Kepler 442, now promoted after Captain Morrison's sacrifice. Webb smiled tiredly. "We remembered that war is supposed to end someday. So we fought like we were already planning for peace. Cathvar recorded every word of that conversation, though he still didn't fully understand what he was witnessing. The humans seemed to be inventing new rules for how civilized species could conduct warfare, rules that no one had ever thought possible before. The war's most critical moment came at Titan Station, a massive space habitat orbiting Jupiter's largest moon. The station served as humanity's primary military shipyard and housed 10,000 civilian workers and their families. It was also the only thing standing between the Vorthan fleet and Earth itself. Cathvar arrived at the Jupiter system just as the largest Vorthan battle fleet ever assembled dropped out of hyperspace. Over 800 ships, including 12 superdreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. Facing them was Commander Ryan Clark with barely 200 human vessels, most of them damaged from previous battles. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even if every human ship fought perfectly, they couldn't stop the Vorthan advance. Clark had two choices. He could sacrifice Titan Station to save his fleet, or sacrifice his fleet to buy time for the station's evacuation. Either way, thousands would die and Earth's defenses would be crippled. What happened next made Cathvar question everything he understood about military decision-making. Instead of making the choice himself, Clark did something that had never been recorded in galactic military history. He called for a vote. All hands, all stations, all civilian populations, Clark announced on an open channel. This is Commander Clark. You all know our situation. The Vorthans will be in weapons range within 6 hours. I need to know what you want me to do. Cathvar's sensors detected communication channels opening throughout the system. Not just between military commanders, but between every human in the area. Soldiers on the warships, workers on Titan Station, families in the civilian shelters, everyone was included in the discussion. Commander, this is Chief Petty Officer Martinez on the destroyer Phoenix, came one voice. My crew has talked it over. We think you should save the station and evacuate the fleet. Negative on that, Phoenix, replied another voice from Titan Station. This is Engineer Paul Martinez in Section C. We've been building ships for 2 years to fight this war. If we run now, those ships mean nothing. The debate continued for 2 hours while the Vorthan fleet advanced. Cathvar listened to thousands of individual conversations as humans throughout the system discussed their options. Military personnel argued with civilians. Parents debated with their children. Engineers compared notes with ship captains. It was chaos. It was inefficient. It was completely contrary to every principle of military command structure that Cathvar had ever observed. It was also producing something remarkable. Commander Clark, came a voice from a woman named Beth Williams, who worked as a teacher on Titan Station. I think we're asking the wrong question. What do you mean, Beth? Clark replied. We're acting like we have to choose between saving the fleet and saving the station. But what if we don't accept those choices? What if we find a third option? I'm listening. Williams paused for a moment. What if some of us volunteer to stay behind and hold the station while the others evacuate? Not because we have to, but because we choose to. The communication channels fell silent for several minutes. Then Engineer Paul Martinez spoke up again. I volunteer, he said simply. I helped build this station. I know every system, every weakness, every way to make it fight above its weight class. Give me 1,000 volunteers and 6 hours, and I'll turn Titan Station into a weapon that'll give those Vorthans nightmares. I volunteer too, added Beth Williams. I've been teaching Vorthan language to our children. I know how they think, how they communicate. I can help coordinate our defense. Within an hour, 3,000 people had volunteered to remain on Titan Station. They weren't all soldiers. Many were engineers, teachers, medical staff, and even some children who refused to be separated from their parents. But they had all made the same impossible choice, to stay behind and fight while their friends and families escaped to safety. Cathvar watched Commander Clark struggle with this decision. Military protocol demanded that he order the volunteers to evacuate with everyone else. But the humans had created a situation that existed outside of any military protocol. All volunteers, Clark finally announced, I accept your choice. You have 6 hours to prepare. Make them count. What followed was the most frantically creative military preparation Cathvar had ever witnessed. Paul Martinez began converting the station's industrial facilities into weapon systems. Mining lasers were repositioned to serve as point defense systems. Cargo loading bays were turned into missile launchers. Even the station's artificial gravity generators were modified to create disorienting fields around approaching enemy ships. Beth Williams organized the civilian volunteers into communication and support teams. Children as young as 10 years old were assigned to monitor sensor stations and relay information between different parts of the station. Elderly civilians who had never held weapons in their lives were taught to operate the improvised defense systems. The station's medical bay was converted into a command center, with Dr. Sarah Kim coordinating both defense operations and emergency medical care. She had volunteers preparing operating rooms while also assembling explosive devices from medical supplies. "This is insane," Cathvar whispered as he watched a group of kindergarten teachers learning to operate mining equipment that had been converted into weapons. "They're using children as soldiers and doctors as bomb makers." But as the 6-hour deadline approached, he began to see the method in the madness. The humans had turned Titan Station into something that existed nowhere in military theory, a fully integrated weapon system where every person, every room, and every piece of equipment served multiple purposes. When the Vorthan fleet arrived in weapons range, they found a space station that refused to behave like a space station. The battle began with a conventional Vorthan assault. Waves of fighters and bombers approached the station while the main fleet prepared to destroy it with overwhelming firepower. But Paul Martinez had anticipated this strategy. The first wave of Vorthan fighters flew directly into a trap. The station's modified artificial gravity generators created a field that sent the enemy ships spinning out of control. While they struggled to regain stability, the station's improvised point defense systems destroyed them with mining lasers operated by school teachers and maintenance workers. The second wave tried a different approach, attacking from multiple angles to overwhelm the station's defenses. But Beth Williams had taught the station's communication system to speak Vorthan, and her volunteers were broadcasting fake orders that sent enemy ships into collisions with each other. By the time the main Vorthan fleet moved into position to destroy the station with their heavy weapons, Titan Station had already accomplished something impossible. It had held off attacks from over 300 enemy ships using equipment operated by people who had learned to use it only hours earlier. But the most remarkable moment came when the station's defenders realized they were about to be overwhelmed. Instead of surrendering or retreating, they began broadcasting a message on all frequencies. "This is Paul Martinez on Titan Station," came the engineer's voice. "We know we can't win this fight, but we want every Vorthan ship to know something. We chose to be here. Nobody forced us to stay and fight. We stayed because this is our home, and these are our people, and some things are worth dying for." The message continued for several minutes, with volunteers throughout the station adding their own words. Teachers talked about the students they were protecting. Parents explained why they wanted to build a better future for their children. Even the children spoke, describing the kind of galaxy they hoped to grow up in. Cathvar recorded every word, though he still didn't understand why the humans were wasting time on speeches when they should have been fighting. Then something unprecedented happened. The Vorthan fleet stopped shooting. "Human station," came a voice from the Vorthan flagship. "This is Fleet Commander Thakvor. Your words have been heard. We request permission to discuss terms." The volunteers on Titan Station had done something that no military force in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had convinced their enemies to stop fighting through the sheer power of their conviction. The battle ended with negotiations instead of destruction. The Vorthan fleet withdrew from the Jupiter system, but they also began secret communications with human leaders about ending the war. The volunteers on Titan Station had saved themselves, their families, and possibly the entire galaxy by proving that there were alternatives to endless violence. Cathvar watched the aftermath of the battle with growing confusion and wonder. The humans had faced an impossible choice and created a third option through sheer collective will. They had turned a space station into a weapon, but they had also turned a weapon into a symbol of hope. He was beginning to realize that he wasn't just observing a war. He was witnessing the birth of something entirely new in galactic civilization. After Titan Station, the war began to turn in humanity's favor. The Vorthan Empire, shaken by their unexpected defeat and the growing number of their own soldiers defecting to the human side, started pulling back from their advanced positions. But as Kethvar continued to observe, he discovered that victory came with costs that didn't show up in any military reports. Admiral Amy Chen, now in command of the entire human fleet after Captain Morrison's sacrifice at Kepler 442, had become a legend throughout human space. Her tactical innovations had saved dozens of worlds and millions of lives. But when Kethvar focused his sensors on her private quarters, he saw a different story. Chen sat at her desk in the middle of the night, surrounded by photographs. Each picture showed a different starship captain who had served under her command. On the desk beside the photos were handwritten reports, personal notes about each officer who had died in the war. Captain Williams of the destroyer Hope, Chen spoke quietly to herself as she wrote, died ramming a Vorthan cruiser to save the colony transport convoy at Proxima 7. Left behind a wife and 2 children. His last words were, "Tell them I was thinking of home." Kethvar watched the admiral continue this ritual for 3 hours, writing personal notes about every captain, every crew member, every soldier who had died under her command. She had been doing this every night for 8 months, and the stack of completed reports had grown to over 2,000 pages. Computer, Chun said to her ship's artificial intelligence, send copies of all these reports to the families. Make sure they know exactly how their loved ones died and why their sacrifice mattered. This was not standard military procedure. Kethvar had observed dozens of species at war, and none of them maintained such detailed personal records of their casualties. Most military commanders focused on strategic objectives and tactical outcomes, not on the individual stories of lost soldiers. But the humans were different. They didn't just fight wars, they remembered them. The next morning, Kethvar watched Xion attend a video conference with the human military leadership. The topic was planning the final assault on the Vorthan home system, which intelligence suggested would end the war within months. "We have them on the run," reported General Martinez from the Ground Forces Command. "Our latest raids have captured 3 more Vorthan supply depots, and their colonial governors are starting to negotiate separate peace agreements. Their fleet strength is down to less than 60% of pre-war levels," added Admiral Foster from the Engineering Corps. "Most of their remaining ships are operating with skeleton crews because so many Vorthan soldiers have defected to our side." Chun listened to the reports, but her questions revealed something that surprised Kethvar. "What about civilian casualties in the areas we've liberated?" she asked. "Minimal," Martinez replied. "Our rules of engagement are working. We're losing more of our own people by being careful, but we're keeping Vorthan civilian deaths under 5%. "And the defectors? How are they being treated?" Admiral Foster smiled. "Better than they expected. Dr. Helen Foster, no relation, has established integration programs on 15 worlds. Former Vorthan soldiers are working alongside our people to rebuild damaged infrastructure." Chen nodded, but Kethvar could see the weight of command in her expression. "What's our projection for ending the war?" "If we push hard, we could force a surrender within 4 months," Martinez said. "But it would require massive assaults on their remaining strongholds. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. And if we continue our current approach? 18 to 24 months, Foster admitted. But total casualties would be maybe 10% of the quick option." The room fell silent as the human leaders considered their options. Kethvar had observed similar strategic discussions among other species, and the choice was always the same: end the war as quickly as possible to minimize your own losses. The humans chose differently. "We go with the longer approach," Chen decided. "Every Vorthan life we save now is a potential ally after the war. Every human soldier who comes home alive is someone who can help build the peace." After the conference ended, Chun remained alone in the briefing room. Kethvar watched her stare at a holographic display showing the current positions of both fleets. But instead of focusing on tactical advantages or strategic objectives, she was looking at casualty projections. "Computer," she said quietly, "show me the estimated casualties if we follow the extended campaign plan." Numbers appeared on the display. Over the next 18 months, The human military expected to lose approximately 40,000 soldiers and crew members. The Vorthan losses were projected at roughly 60,000 military personnel and fewer than 10,000 civilians. Now show me the quick campaign option. The new numbers were staggering. A direct assault on the Vorthan home system would result in over 300,000 human casualties and nearly 2 million Vorthan deaths. Chun stared at these numbers for a long time. Then she began typing a personal message to every ship captain in the human fleet. To all commanding officers, she wrote, I know you're tired. I know you want to go home. I know that every day this war continues, we lose more good people. But I'm asking you to be patient for a few more months. We have a chance to end this conflict in a way that saves millions of lives on both sides. That's worth waiting for. Cathvar was puzzled by this message. Military leaders were supposed to prioritize victory over enemy casualties. Yet Chun seemed to care as much about Vorthan lives as human ones. The answer came during a private conversation between Chun and Dr. Sarah Kim, the medical officer who had helped coordinate the defense of Titan Station. Amy, you're carrying too much weight, Kim said as they walked through the medical bay of Chun's flagship. You can't be responsible for every single death in this war. I'm responsible for every death I could have prevented, Chun replied. Every order I give, every strategy one choose, people die because of my decisions. The least I can do is remember them. But you're also saving people. The integration programs are working. Former enemies are becoming allies. We're proving that wars don't have to end in genocide. Chun stopped walking and turned to look at Kim. Do you know what Captain Morrison told me before he rammed that Vorthan command ship? He said, make sure this war ends with something better than victory. I think about that every day. Kim nodded slowly.
He was right.
Victory just means one side stops fighting. Peace means both sides choose to build something together. This conversation helped Cathvar understand something crucial about human warfare. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to create the conditions for a lasting peace. Every tactical decision was made with consideration for how it would affect relationships after the war ended. Over the following weeks, Cathvar observed the results of this approach. Human forces continued their advance toward the Vorthan home system, but they moved carefully, always offering surrender terms that allowed enemy forces to retain their dignity. Captured Vorthan soldiers were treated not as prisoners, but as potential future allies. The most remarkable example came when a Vorthan fleet commander named Crixtal agreed to switch sides after his forces were surrounded by human ships. Instead of demanding his surrender, Admiral Chun offered him a position as an advisor in the human fleet. Why would you trust me? Crixtal asked during their first meeting. Because trust has to start somewhere, Chun replied. We can't build peace with people we don't trust. Crixtal became one of the most effective commanders in the human fleet, using his knowledge of Vorthan tactics to minimize casualties on both sides. But more importantly, his defection encouraged dozens of other Vorthan officers to reconsider their loyalty to the Empire. By the end of his 6th month observing the war, Cathvar had seen something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were winning not just through superior tactics or technology, but by convincing their enemies to join them. They had turned warfare into a form of diplomacy, using each battle to demonstrate the kind of civilization they wanted to build. But the cost was visible in leaders like Admiral Chun, who carried the weight of every decision and remembered every loss. The humans were proving that it was possible to wage war without losing one's humanity, but maintaining that humanity required enormous strength and sacrifice from those who led the fight. The final battle of the war took place in the Vorthan home system, around a red giant star with 7 planets. The Vorthan Empire had gathered its remaining forces for one last, desperate defense of their homeworld. Over 400 ships, including every super-dreadnought they had left, surrounded the planet in layered defensive formations. Admiral Chun's human fleet numbered only 300 ships, but nearly 50 of those vessels were commanded by former Vorthan officers who had defected during the war. The mixed fleet also included civilian vessels that had been converted for combat, cargo ships loaded with humanitarian supplies, and even a hospital ship that had been specially equipped to treat both human and Vorthan casualties. Kethvar positioned the Silent Eye at the edge of the system and prepared to record what he expected would be the war's bloodiest battle. Instead, he witnessed something that redefined his understanding of how civilized species could end a conflict. The battle began not with weapons fire, but with a broadcast from Admiral Chun to the entire Vorthan home fleet. "This is Admiral Chun of the Human Defense Forces," she announced on all frequencies. "We're here to end this war, but we're not here to destroy your people or your world. Every ship that surrenders will be treated with honor. Every crew member who lays down arms will be offered a place in the galaxy we're building together." The Vorthan response came from Fleet Admiral Vextar, the Empire's supreme military commander. "Humans, you speak of honor while you corrupt our soldiers and turn them against their own people. We will not surrender to invaders." "We're not invaders," Chun replied. "We're neighbors who want to stop fighting. But if you choose battle over peace, we'll give you the fight you're asking for." What followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination that combined human creativity with Vorthan military precision. The defected Vorthan commanders used their knowledge of Imperial fleet formations to identify weaknesses, while human officers exploited those weaknesses with unconventional tactics. Commander Ryan Clark, recovered from his wounds at Titan Station, led a squadron of modified cargo ships in a flanking maneuver that confused the Vorthan sensors. While the enemy focused on what appeared to be a supply convoy, Admiral Chun's main battle fleet struck at the heart of the Vorthan defensive line. But even in the midst of intense combat, the humans maintained their principles. When a Vorthan destroyer lost power and began drifting helplessly toward the system's star, 2 human frigates immediately broke formation to rescue the enemy crew. "Admiral," reported Captain Walsh from the rescue ship, "we've got 300 Vorthan survivors. They're wounded and scared, but they're alive." "Take them to the hospital ship," Chun ordered. "Make sure they get the same medical care as our own people." This act of mercy in the middle of battle had an unexpected effect. Other Vorthan ships began sending distress calls when they were damaged, expecting rescue rather than destruction. The battle gradually transformed from a fight to the death into a complex rescue operation where both sides worked to minimize casualties. The turning point came when Fleet Admiral Vextar's own flagship was crippled by a coordinated attack from human and defected Vorthan forces. As the massive dreadnought lost power and began listing toward the planet's gravity well, Vextar prepared to activate the ship's self-destruct mechanism rather than face capture. Then something unprecedented happened. Commander Krixtal, the former Vorthan officer who had defected to serve under Admiral Chun, opened a direct communication channel to his former superior. "Admiral Vextar," Krixtal said, "I know what you're thinking. I was prepared to die rather than surrender to. But the humans showed me something I never expected. They showed me that surrender doesn't mean shame. It means the chance to build something better." "You are a traitor, Krixtal," Vextar replied coldly. "You have dishonored everything our people stand for." "No," Krixtal said gently. "I've discovered what our people could stand for if we chose a different path. Let me show you what I've learned." What followed was a conversation between 2 former enemies that lasted over an hour, while the battle raged around them. Krixtal described his experiences serving in a human fleet, the respect he had been shown, and the vision of the future that the humans were offering to all species. Kethvar recorded every word of that conversation, recognizing it as the moment when the war truly ended. Fleet Admiral Vextar finally agreed to surrender, but with conditions. "I will order my forces to stand down," he said, "but I want guarantees that my people will be treated fairly." "You have my word," Admiral Chun responded immediately. "Every Vorthan who surrenders will be offered the same choice that Krixtal accepted, the chance to help build the peace." The battle ended within hours of Vextar's surrender order. But what impressed Kethvar most was what happened next. Instead of accepting the surrender and returning home, the human fleet immediately began humanitarian operations throughout the Vorthan system. Hospital ships moved to planets where the fighting had caused civilian casualties. Engineering vessels began repairing damaged orbital installations. Supply ships distributed food and medical supplies to Vorthan colonies that had been cut off from their supply lines during the war. The most remarkable scene occurred on the Vorthan homeworld itself. Admiral Chun personally led the first landing party, accompanied by Commander Krixtal, and a mixed group of human and Vorthan officers. They were met at the spaceport by thousands of Vorthan civilians who had expected conquest and occupation. Instead, they found their former enemies offering assistance and cooperation. "We're here to help you rebuild," Chen announced to the assembled crowds. "This war is over. Now we work together to make sure it never happens again." Over the following months, Cathvar observed the most unusual post-war reconstruction in galactic history. Instead of imposing their will on the defeated Vorthans, the humans invited them to participate as equals in designing their shared future. War crimes tribunals were established, but they prosecuted criminals from both sides. Human soldiers who had violated ethical codes were tried alongside Vorthan officers who had committed atrocities. Justice was applied equally, regardless of which side someone had fought for. Reconstruction efforts were jointly planned and implemented. Former enemies worked side by side to rebuild damaged worlds, restore trade routes, and establish new diplomatic relationships. The human principle of treating defeated enemies as potential future allies proved remarkably effective. The most significant development was the establishment of joint military academies where human and Vorthan officers trained together. These institutions became laboratories for developing new approaches to conflict resolution that emphasized cooperation over domination. Commander Ryan Clark, who had organized the volunteers at Titan Station, became the director of the largest joint academy. His first class included the children of soldiers who had fought on opposite sides during the war. "We're not teaching them how to fight," Clark explained to a group of visiting diplomats. "We're teaching them how to prevent wars. There's a big difference." Dr. Helen Foster, who had treated wounded soldiers in the underground resistance, established medical programs that brought human and Vorthan healing techniques together. Her hospitals became symbols of the new cooperation, places where former enemies worked together to save lives. Even Fleet Admiral Vextar found a role in the new order. He became an advisor to the Joint Military Command, helping to develop strategies for defending both human and Vorthan worlds against future threats. "I spent my entire career preparing for war," Vextar said during a ceremony marking the first anniversary of the war's end. "Now I'm learning how to prepare for peace. It's much more difficult, but infinitely more rewarding." Cathvar watched all of this with growing amazement. The humans hadn't just won a war, they had transformed their enemies into allies and used the conflict as an opportunity to create something entirely new in galactic civilization. But perhaps the most telling moment came when Admiral Chen announced her retirement from active military service. Instead of accepting honors or pursuing political power, she chose to become a teacher at one of the joint academies. "I've spent enough time learning how to end wars," she said. "Now I want to spend time learning how to prevent them." As Cathvar prepared to return to the Galactic Council with his report, he realized that he had witnessed something unprecedented in the galaxy's long history of conflict. The humans had proven that it was possible to wage war without losing one's civilization, to defeat enemies without destroying them, and to build peace that lasted longer than the conflicts that preceded it. Cathvar sat in his quarters aboard the Silent Eye for 7 days, staring at a blank report template. In his 3,000 years as an observer, he had never struggled to write a mission summary. The format was always the same: tactical analysis, technological assessment, casualty statistics, and strategic recommendations. But every time he tried to apply this template to what he had witnessed during the Human-Vorthan War, the words felt empty and meaningless. How could he reduce Admiral Chen's sleepless nights to a casualty statistic? How could he explain the volunteers at Titan Station using standard tactical analysis? How could he describe the underground resistance on Haven Prime in terms of military effectiveness ratings? On the 8th day, he gave up trying to write a conventional report. Instead, he began with a single sentence that violated every protocol in the Observer Core Manual. "The humans have taught me that I've been watching wars wrong for 3,000 years. He wrote about Danny Rodriguez, the farmer who became a military leader while never forgetting he was still a farmer. He described watching Rodriguez teach Vorthan children to play human games in refugee camps, turning former enemies into future friends through something as simple as sharing toys and laughter. He wrote about Lisa Hayes, the school teacher who organized supply missions like classroom projects and treated dangerous journeys through enemy territory as learning experiences. He described how Hayes had established schools in the underground tunnels of Haven Prime, ensuring that human and Vorthan children could learn together even during the darkest days of the war. He wrote about Marcus Webb, the software engineer who became a ghost in the tunnels but used his invisibility to heal rather than harm. He described Webb's network of hidden cameras and secret passages, not as military intelligence assets, but as tools for building trust between enemies. He wrote about Paul Martinez, the engineer who had converted Titan Station into a weapon but died thinking about the home he was protecting rather than the enemies he was fighting. He described how Martinez's innovations were now being used to rebuild Vorthan cities damaged during the war. But most of all, he wrote about the moments that had no place in a military report but seemed to contain the essence of what made humans different. He described the 12-year-old girl who carried messages through battlefields while humming songs she had learned in school. He wrote about the elderly farmer who converted his tractors into tanks but still stopped to water his crops between battles. He chronicled the doctor who treated enemy wounded with the same care she gave to her own people, not because military protocol required it, but because her conscience demanded it. Each story led to the same impossible conclusion. The humans had found a way to wage war without losing their souls. Kethvar's report grew to over 300 pages, filled with personal narratives instead of statistical analyses. He included audio recordings of conversations, video files of ordinary moments between battles, and detailed observations of how humans maintain their relationships and values even under the most extreme stress. He wrote about the democratic vote that had taken place in the middle of the Battle of Titan Station, where thousands of people had debated their own fate while enemy ships approached. He described how that vote had produced not just a military strategy, but a moral statement that had ultimately convinced the enemy to stop fighting. He chronicled the war crimes tribunals that had prosecuted soldiers from both sides equally, demonstrating that humans held themselves to the same standards they applied to their enemies. He documented the reconstruction programs that had turned defeated Vorthan worlds into thriving joint colonies where former enemies worked together as partners. But the section that took him longest to write was his analysis of what all of this meant for the future of galactic civilization. For 17 previous observations, he wrote, "I have documented how species conduct warfare. I have cataloged their weapons, analyzed their tactics, and predicted their outcomes based on mathematical models of military effectiveness. I have always assumed that the purpose of war was victory, and that the purpose of victory was the imposition of one's will upon the defeated enemy. The humans have proven that these assumptions are fundamentally flawed. The humans do not wage war to achieve victory. They wage war to create the conditions for peace. They do not seek to impose their will upon defeated enemies. They seek to transform those enemies into willing partners. They do not view conflict as a zero-sum competition where one side must lose for the other to win. They view conflict as a problem to be solved through cooperation and mutual understanding. This approach has produced results that traditional military theory would consider impossible. The humans have not only defeated a superior enemy force, they have converted that enemy into an ally. They have not only ended a war, they have prevented future wars by addressing the underlying causes of conflict. Most remarkably, they have accomplished all of this without sacrificing their core values or fundamental nature. They have remained recognizably human throughout the entire conflict, maintaining their compassion, creativity, and commitment to democracy even under the most extreme pressure." Kethvar paused in his writing to review recordings from his previous 17 observations. In each case, he had watched species change during warfare, usually becoming more brutal, more authoritarian, or more focused on survival at any cost. The humans had changed too, but they had become more cooperative, more innovative, and more committed to their principles. He continued writing, "The implications of this observation extend far beyond military strategy. The humans have demonstrated that it is possible for a technological civilization to maintain its ethical foundations while engaging in large-scale conflict. They have shown that warfare can be conducted as an extension of diplomacy rather than as a replacement for it. Furthermore, their approach has practical advantages that traditional military doctrine ignores. By treating enemies as potential allies, they have gained intelligence advantages that espionage could never provide. By maintaining ethical standards during combat, they have inspired loyalty among their own forces and respect among their opponents. By planning for peace while fighting for survival, they have created sustainable solutions instead of temporary victories. The final section of his report was the most difficult to write because it required him to acknowledge that his previous recommendations to the Galactic Council had been inadequate. Based on my observations of human warfare, he concluded, I must revise my understanding of what makes a species suitable for membership in the galactic community. Previous reports have focused on technological capability, military strength, and political stability as primary criteria for evaluation. The humans possess adequate technology, effective military forces, and reasonably stable governments. But what makes them truly remarkable is their ability to maintain their civilization's core values while adapting to extreme challenges. They have proven that they can be trusted with power because they use that power to create opportunities for others rather than to dominate them. I recommend not only that humanity be offered protection and membership in the Galactic Council, but that they be invited to take a leadership role in developing new approaches to interspecies conflict resolution. The galaxy needs what the humans have discovered, the ability to wage peace as effectively as they wage war. Cathvar submitted his report to the Council and waited for their response. It came within hours, in the form of an emergency session request. He had never been called to an emergency council session before. When he arrived at the council chambers, every member was present, including several species that rarely participated in routine meetings. The atmosphere was unlike anything he had experienced in his centuries of service. Observer Cathvar, the council leader, began, Your report has raised questions that go to the heart of our understanding of civilized behavior. Are you prepared to defend your conclusions? I am prepared to stand by my observations, Cathvar replied. I have recorded evidence for every claim in my report. You are suggesting that everything we know about warfare and species development may be incorrect, said the crystal-shaped council member. You are implying that our entire approach to evaluating species may be fundamentally flawed. I am suggesting that the humans have found a better way, Cathvar said simply. And I believe we should learn from them. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. Council members questioned every aspect of Cathvar's report, challenged his methodology, and demanded additional evidence for his most controversial conclusions. But in the end, they reached a unanimous decision. The human species would be offered not just protection and council membership, but a new role that had never existed before: Galactic Peace Coordinators. They would be asked to help other species resolve conflicts using the methods they had developed during their war with the Vorthans. The Council also made an unprecedented decision about Cathvar himself. Instead of assigning him to observe another war, they offered him a new position: Cultural Exchange Coordinator with Humanity. You have spent 3,000 years watching other species from a distance, the Council leader explained. Perhaps it is time for you to learn from them up close. Cathvar accepted the assignment immediately. For the first time in his long life, he was curious about something other than military tactics and strategic outcomes. He wanted to understand how an entire species could maintain such remarkable consistency of values across millions of individuals and thousands of different situations. As he prepared to return to human space, this time as a participant rather than an observer, Cathvar reflected on how much his understanding of civilization had changed during his assignment. He had begun his mission believing that the purpose of observation was to catalog the weaknesses and strengths of other species. He was ending it with the realization that the purpose of observation was to discover what you could learn from them. The humans had indeed changed him, just as they had changed the Vorthans and everyone else they had encountered during the war. But unlike his previous subjects of study, they had changed him for the better.